So I will start us off. So this is a panel on accessible housing with particular reference to Wellington, but also speaking more generally. And I'll start us with a karakia. So kia, sorry, my cat's in the way. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana. Hei huarahi mā tātou e te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa. Huie tai kie. Just gently moving the cat. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Luck Maloney Byrne toko awa, ko Ngāti Pākehā toko iwe, no mirihiku a hau, ke poreroa toko kāinga i nei. Ko Jan Logie toko whānau, ko Ray toko papa, ko Judith McGinnity toko mama, ko Jan Logie toko ingoa. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening for this really important discussion about how we can improve the accessibility of housing in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And before we get to hearing from our panelists, I'll just give a bit of an introduction in terms of the Green Party perspective on this issue. We've long said that we believe that everybody has a right to a warm, dry, safe, affordable and accessible home. Yet we know that the estimates are that only about 2% of our housing stock in this country is accessible. And that's really just an estimate as well. And we don't have much of a sense of what is meant by that. And I think it's mostly on universal design principles as opposed to a broader understanding of what people need in terms of appropriate housing. And the United Nations, I'll come back to this at the end of my intro, but have just given us as a country a bit of a hustle for our lack of progress around provision of accessible housing. So the government has an agenda of the new builds through Kāinga Ora, that 15% of those will be to universal design, which I would argue is a pretty low target. They've said that they'll increase it to 25%, which is the Labour Party policy this term. But again, I would argue that's very low when you consider the 2% of our housing stock being accessible at the moment. And I also need to point out with that their definition of accessible is about universal design. And they've come up with their own special definition of universal design that is not as accessible as the standards. And when we compare it to LifeMark, who's kind of the official organisation in this country that was set up by CCS Disability for helping build accessible homes, the Kāinga Ora's definition of accessible at full universal design does not meet their definition for full universal design, which I think is pretty disappointing. So I'm just going to try and move my cat, see if that works. And then on top of that, we have the problem that the government hasn't committed yet to fully protecting the money to ensure that when retrofitting is needed to make a house accessible, then that's available. And the Kiwi build, which is because we're in as a country, obviously, we talk about now. We acknowledge that we have a housing crisis and we need to build more houses, and these will be houses that are with us for a very long time. And Kāinga Ora is just building a small percentage of those homes. Most of them are on the private market, and many are being incentivized through Kiwi Build, but where government will protect the investment for those developers. But they're not doing anything to incentivize those developers to build accessible homes. And they're not even keeping track of how many of those homes that are being built are accessible. And then we haven't seen any progress on changes to the building code to improve accessibility of all of our houses. So I would argue the amount of action is just not in any way meeting the scale of the problem. And that's kind of talking about accessibility in that very limited way as well. And if we have a broader understanding of accessibility, and particularly to pull out some examples of where somebody gave me this week around a family where 3 of their children are autistic, and the housing that they were being put into in terms of social housing was requiring the children to share rooms, when that actually was just not going to be appropriate for their need for quiet and grounding. So we're not understanding that. And the affordability problem for housing means that many people who may have mental health that they're managing and that they're actively, need that time and space for themselves to be able to manage their mental health to be well, that actually they're not able to afford homes that they can live in by themselves to be able to do that. So they're forced into situations where their mental health deteriorates because they have no choice if they want a roof over their heads. So, and then we have the situation of, which we heard at the last meeting, of people with learning disabilities who are in group homes, who don't have control over all aspects of their life in the way that they believe that they want, because of the conditions that are put on them in those homes. So the picture, this is just the absolute overview, and we're going to get the details from our speakers tonight. But this is why the UN has called for the government to have a target of 100% universal design for Kāinga Ora houses, and to make those changes so that all private sector new builds are accessible. And they're also calling for the phasing out of group homes to enable people to have appropriate housing, and recognising the need for the welfare expert advisory groups' recommendations to be implemented to ensure affordability. And they're all things the Green Party are strongly behind, and we think now is the time to be having this conversation, because we have the Accessibility for New Zealanders bill in front of Parliament.
Useless.
And we also have local government elections, where there's a role for local government to play in incentivising this housing until central government comes to the party. And we're midway through a term of a Labour-led government, and we believe we need to be calling on the government now to be doing better, and to make sure that this is an election issue, because accessible housing is relevant to every single New Zealander, because either we're at some stage in our life, if we're lucky enough to age, going to have mobility challenges. 1 in 4 of us have a disability, and we also have friends and family that we might want to visit or be able to visit us. So this is central to the idea of an inclusive society where we're all free to be able to live our lives, our best lives. So that's enough from me. But I just want to thank everybody for joining this call or who may be watching it at a later date. And now thank our speakers for joining us today. And also just to quickly acknowledge Anna Heath, who you can see at the top, who's been interning with my office and has done the wonderful job of organising these meetings. And I'm really grateful for all of her work pulling this together. Thanks, Anna. So now the first speaker I'd like to introduce this evening is Martine Abel-Williamson. She's a Senior Human Rights Advisor for the Human Rights Commission, co-chair of the Auckland Council Disability Advisory Panel, and president of World Blind Union and board member of Disability Connect. Very lucky to have these powerhouses with us this evening. And the first question I'm going to ask all of our panelists is just, how would you describe the housing situation we have at the moment, and what impact has that had on you or your friends, family and community? Kia ora, Martine.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Martine Abel-Williamson aho. Can people hear and see me fine?
Very well.
Great. I love the idea of evidence because I think most of us have quite good personal stories. But tonight I want to remind people about documentation that you can use and inquiry opportunities to be involved in. So I'll be quick because I realize there's other very knowledgeable speakers. In August 21, the Human Rights Commission launched a framework, the Rights and Access to Decent Homes, and this is guidelines. So that was not too long ago, and we launched those guidelines so that local communities, local government, central government can take human rights realization into consideration when housing is developed. And as a result of that guidelines, which you can request at any time, there is now an inquiry underway about housing, and this is housing in general, about affordable, accessible, the right to a home. We've got the Human Rights Act 1993, and under those powers and strategic plan, we are inquiring into it. So if you don't hear from us about an opportunity to participate, please get in touch. Now, just talk about my role in Disability Connect, because we've got so many hats on. In May 2021, I was one of the interviewers of the Disability Connect and Action Against Poverty report launched. And the report was called Where Will We Live in New Zealand? And, you know, that report has got a lot of anecdotal evidence in it. Earlier this year, in April and May, the Donald Beasley Institute launched a few reports, 2 of them, about housing for disabled people in New Zealand. And again, I was an interviewer. And, you know, people may think you interview on all these reports. When you hear people's stories, you can't unknow it and you become very involved. So I'll just scroll down to the report's name. The reports are available in all sorts of formats. My Experience, My Life is one, and there was a second one where they included specifically carers and families of disabled people who couldn't have participated, for instance, because of verbal or communication issues. So, and that one is called Housing for Disabled People, Families, whānau, Support, Perspectives. Anna is very kindly putting up the details of all of these reports. And of course, they show anecdotal evidence about unaffordability, about people not aware of their human rights, about housing providers not aware of human rights according to the CRPD, and just basic needs for standards of living. So I'll stop now, but I want to say that I wanted to say what's wrong with housing in New Zealand. These are the reports, these are the evidence.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Martine. I think that I'm sure I speak for everyone in saying how helpful that is, and that it's always good to have that the reports, some tangible outline of experience to go back to. So Bob has just stepped out of shot, so I'm wondering if we go to now Kylie Black, who is a campaign for Access Matters and advocate for the blind community. Kia ora, Kylie.
Kia ora. Yeah, Access Matters invited me to come and share tonight. I think I don't actually think people really think about access until they're in a position where you have to think about access. And when you do have to think about access, there's very little in actual accessible housing on the housing market. And like even with the 15%, with the 2% right now, you know, one in four have disabilities. Like the maths doesn't add up. I know for myself and my own wider family and friends with disabilities, finding an accessible home is a nightmare. It's really difficult, and you've got to make often a lot of compromises for actually what you can work. But the thing is that, like I had sent you earlier and you touched on briefly before, is that access doesn't actually just affect those with disabilities. You know, if we actually made accessible homes accessible, if we made homes accessible full stop, they would work for everyone. And the reality is that access works for all people all the time, as opposed to some of the people some of the time. And if we are lucky enough to grow older, we will have access issues. But the reality is too, is that no one actually plans for disability, and no one plans for getting sick or plans for having access needs, but life happens. Do you know what I mean? And I think my challenge back to those who are in charge of access and those who actually have the power to do anything about access in the housing market across the board, and those who are property developers, like they actually have the power in their hands to change it, not just for others, but themselves, you know, because they could be their own statistic in having to find accessible housing because accessible housing hasn't been built, it hasn't been maintained. I mean, you look around at these new property developments and it's great, but it doesn't make sense to not have access. Like it just boggles my mind. Like I couldn't get an apartment in Hamilton because they all had stairs, you know. Anything that was available had stairs. Yeah, so I guess I throw a bit back. Martine did a brilliant job at bringing the stats and the data, and I guess I just want to throw back the thought on it of actually it works for everyone. It works for all people, as opposed to some people, and it benefits all of us. And like you touched on from our conversation earlier, like it doesn't just benefit someone with a disability. You know, like I want to go to friends' places and stuff like that. I can't go because they're in inaccessible housing to me, you know, so I miss out on community participation and community connection because other people's homes aren't accessible, you know, and it works for mums, and it works for, you know, when you have that ACC injury and it's temporary, and it works as you get older. You know, we've got our older generation looking for accessible flat access housing, and we know that things like lips into houses and small stairs are some of the biggest tripping risks and hazards. So, you know, just make it accessible from the outset. And none of us have to worry about that then. And we know that then we've got safe homes, options and choices. You know, I stayed in a home for 10 years that, you know, and it worked for me but it had its challenges too. But it's because it's so hard to find anything, and I had a good setup there, but it's so hard to find anything that is out there that you can just move to. You know, I've got friends that move every year. They don't have disabilities. You know, once I found something that worked, it's not as easy as just wanting to choose to move, because there's so many other factors to consider.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kylie. Think you make that point about the benefits to all of us just really eloquently. Bob, I'd like to introduce Bob Osbourne now, who's a disability and housing activist, currently collating information and personal stories about van life and accessibility issues. Kia ora, Bob.
Oh, I think I've got it. Can you hear me? Cool. Hey, I just want to touch on something, because I'm actually in a KA house at the moment at Aotearoa, and I probably just want to reflect briefly on just what's happened here in the last 10 months. So over last Christmas, Housing New Zealand painted this house outside. They didn't just paint it, they stripped all the paint off the weatherboards, right back to the weatherboards, and built it all back up again, undercoated, top coated the works. Not long after that, well, actually probably about 3 months ago, they actually came out and remodeled my bathroom because my cast iron bath was going a bit rusty. All good. And about a week after that, they put new insulation through the top of the ceiling. About a week after they did the insulation on the ceiling, I had a meeting with my tenancy manager, who then informed me that they will be moving us out of these houses within the next year, as they're all going to demolition the whole block. So that whole thing, and I do believe I read an article in the news a while ago about the government wanted to make KA accountable for costs. They would have spent $20,000 on this house in 9 months, just so they can demolish in a year's time. You want to talk about costs, it's pathetic. I'm at Cannons Creek at the moment. Just down the road from me is the Castor Crescent redevelopment that's going on. They've spent two years doing earthworks, basically. There's nothing above ground's been done at all. It's all infrastructure, underground infrastructure. I don't think, well, the last time I was around here was about 3 weeks ago. There has not a single nail been put in a single house in 2 years. So, but it's crazy. I think the sustainability and the carbon neutral effects of the amount of dirt are moving out there for really little reason. It's phenomenal. They want to move us all down there. That's what they told us. That's what they told my neighbours. Most of my neighbours are elderly as well. So having mobility issues and stuff. All the houses planned down there, they're all two-story, a whole lot of them. I don't know. I've got dogs. I mean, there's a lot of issues that come into play around, you know, being elderly, having room for your pets, dogs in my case, and also to do the things that we like to do to, you know, as a past time of day. And one of my big things has been gardening. That's always gone on hold now because it's like it's going to be ripped to pieces in the next year. So what's the point, you know? So really, our whole lives are on hold. Well, Housing New Zealand decide what they're going to do. We'll do it, you know. So, I mean, it's good to have the notice, I guess, but yeah, the other side of it is just, yeah, what do you do, you know, in the meantime? Moving on. I'm an advocate for responsible freedom camping, and I actually founded Responsible Campers Association. We have a number of Facebook groups, and one we've specifically got control of in the last 18 months has been one called Van Life. We've actually grown the membership, and that's grown from probably 5,000 people to 16,000 as of today. We're seeing huge increases in people moving into vans, and that's going back on the group statistics. And actually, you see the jump starting pretty much at the first COVID lockdown. I think COVID's with the unsurety of people's employment and stuff has made a lot of people think about long-term security issues and not being tied to mortgages and stuff. So there's a huge increase in people living in that. A large number of those people are disabled. Hate to say it. It's what people come up with. I was an advocate of freedom camping. I've come across some really, I call them strange for want of a better word. Like I've become aware of, I know personally of 2 people now who are actually disabled who spend 24/7 touring around New Zealand on incumbent push bikes, towing trailers with bloody wheelchairs on. These are people that have no fixed home. These are people who, and admittedly, they're doing it willingly, but you just don't think about that aspect of what people are doing. It's phenomenal. I had a lady that I actually first met probably 2 years ago. I thought she was living in a caravan. And when I was doing some research for this through the social media, she sent me a message, and it actually turns out she's not living. She's 78 years old. She's living in a box trailer. It's 3 meters by 2 meters. She's got a 1 meter high, she called it a window opening in which she climbs through to access it. This is a 78-year-old woman. And I'm like, I was actually horrified when she told me, and like I was about ready to go screaming down the MP's office to get something done about it. But she said to me, she said she's actually quite happy. She's got a dog. There seems to be some sort of disconnect between her thinking and that she thinks she can't have a dog at a pensioner flat or KO unit or whatever. And I'm gonna do some more follow-up on that. I'm actually gonna meet with you next week. So I'll do a little bit of follow-up on that. But yeah, it's an interesting disconnect there as well. So again, it's people who've got pets that need to be accommodated and stuff like that, and a possibility that people don't realise that you can have pets in KO houses and that now. So I know when I was a poster boy for Jenny Anderson at Labor in Lower Hutt for the 2017 election. And she knew at that time that I had pets, and I think at that time we actually had to get special permission for the dog to stay with me, because that was actually a real big obstacle for me, was even trying to get into emergency housing. And there ain't no way in the world I'm giving up my dog. She saved my life twice now. I'm not, it's not, yeah, one of those big black holes. So, yeah. I don't know, anything specifically you want to ask, Jen, or?
Sorry. Thank you, Bob. I think that was a really good introduction and a range of perspectives in terms of where we're at the moment. I wonder, before going into a discussion about the solutions, I wonder if anybody has reflections on how well. Sorry, yeah.
I think you missed me. I'm sorry, I had technical issues at the beginning.
Who's that? Sorry.
Susan Williams.
Oh, great. Sorry. Yes, I did miss you.
No, I was having technical issues at the beginning, so I wasn't there before the panel. Apologies for that.
No, not at all. So just then we have our next speaker before we get into that second discussion. So Suzanne Williams, who's a disability activist, performer, director and improviser, recently presented a show called Illegally Blind, which focused on accessibility and intersectionality. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I'm here as myself, but I'm also co-chair of Wellington City Council's Access Advisory Group. And apologies for the background noise. I'm in the backstage of a rehearsal right now. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yes.
You can, cool. Yeah, so I actually live in a Kāinga Ora house in Koroi that I would rate is about 60% accessible for me. And that is like, that was amazing, getting a house that was that accessible for me. So I'm very much here as myself, as someone in the system that it's not working for. And I think you asked the question, how would I describe the state of housing for me? I would use several four-letter words that aren't fit for polite society, but I don't think it's a polite society when, like you say, disabled people don't have access to housing. And I think the perspective I want to bring also uses what Jan and some others have touched on, that accessibility is not only, it's not only necessarily universal design, it's policy and it's choice and it's understanding each person's individual access needs. So for me, I'm functionally blind, chronically ill, ADHD, autistic, mentally ill, and some of my access needs are things like I don't sleep, I don't operate on a 24-hour day, I can't be next door to people that I'm going to keep awake, and I tick at 3 o'clock in the morning. I basically need a freestanding house that's not next to people that I'm going to be terrified I'm going to disturb, and that is one of my access needs. I also need a house that is close to public transport. That is the thing that is not currently met in my house. I get buses once an hour during sort of the middle of the day and at commuter times, and then nothing at evenings or weekends except a bus stop that's 1.3 k's away, which is a long way if you're blind and have other disabilities. And the other thing is there's no flexibility within the system. So for me, the fact that my house has stairs is not a problem for me. Like you say, it's not great for visitors, but one problem for me is I need to sit when I'm cooking and I can't see very well, and my stove has knobs at the back rather than at the front. My stove just broke. I said, cool, you could make this accessible for me by getting this kind of stove that's actually cheaper, and they had no way of doing that. So I've got the same one that I had before. When we asked to move me there, we were like, it needs to be near a regular bus route. They put me near a bus stop that never gets buses. So housing accessibility is a case of having many options and having that flexibility. And as somebody else mentioned, I'm not going to be able to move. When I moved in, we had to essentially change the house. It cost several $1,000s of my own money to make it essentially dark enough for me to live in without getting sick. And that took my family 4 days. I'm never going to be able to move again. And now I'm in a house that's not completely accessible for the rest of my life. But I knew after 1.5 years on the Kaingaora waiting list, if I turned it down, I could be on that waiting list for another year, another 2. So another thing that needs to happen is when somebody turns down a house because it's not accessible, they need to be at the top of the list. There needs to be flexibility at every point. It's not just a case of moving into accessible housing, it's a case of keeping housing accessible while you're in it. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you so much. Is it Susan or Suzanne?
Susan.
Susan. Sorry for getting that wrong before.
Oh, that's no worries.
Yeah, thank you for that and making those connections between the house and the environment and the community, because that is really important and has to be part of this conversation, as well as those points around the flexibility and the having to accept semi-accessible has definitely been coming through as a theme. Kylie.
I just wanted to touch on that, and I didn't really know how to touch on it earlier. The reason, what Susan said, the reason I stayed in that house for 10 years, 10 and a half years, is because with no accessible bathroom, instead the front and back was getting portable ramps, but also it was in the middle of town and my bedroom was in the middle of the house. So it meant that I was still part of the living even when I was stuck in my bedroom. But like Susan said, it was in the middle of town. There was a bus stop out the end of my driveway, but more than that, people who were going to events and stuff would be happy to drop by and pick me up because I was on their way, but there's no way they would have come to the suburbs to pick me up. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so it worked for me because there was no other option for me that worked quite as well. And because I had a house, and because I could make the bathroom work for me and I could make it work for me. My situation changed recently and they're doing the house up and I've moved, but we've moved into a house with stairs at the front, and we'll look to get a ramp hopefully put in soon. But of course, again, like Susan noted as well, there's long wait lists for that. So it doesn't just happen. Do you know what I mean? It took them weeks to come and pick up the ramp from the old place. And you know, you get the bathroom modifications, but you get it as a once-off lifetime thing. So as a renter, who, like, do you put your money into that house? Now, had I known that I would have been there for 10 years, yeah, I would have done the bathroom thing. And if I moved down the line and, you know, but as a renter, you don't necessarily have the assurances that you're going to be in a house long enough to be able to put that kind of money into it either. And it is a one-off, once in a lifetime grant. Now, granted, there are exceptional circumstances where they will make a bend to help you again, but it's not guaranteed as far as I'm aware. And the thing is, as a renter, how am I meant to choose to put that in when I've got a year-on-year rental? Like, and then how do I take an accessible home? Because there were no accessible homes on the market for us to be able to transfer into, you know, and then the accessible homes that are available don't necessarily work anyway. The other thing I wanted to throw into this conversation, I have had a lot of talks around accessible homes. Actually, one of my most interesting talks was with a guy whose whole company was about building accessible homes for people. I think he built 6 or 7 fully accessible homes with all of the different heights, kitchens, everything, like everything an accessible home could need. And every single house ended up being sold to able-bodied families that didn't need the access but liked the home because it was so accessible and easy to use, and they liked the layout. They didn't go to actual disabled people and families because we were outbid, because we don't have often the same equality and the same income rates to be able to attain the same housing. So we're outbeat in the market, and this is going into a different subject, but it touches again on the inequalities. The minute you get into a relationship, you lose your benefit. Like, and what able-bodied person and couple get into a relationship and then one of you goes, cool, I'm never going to work again and I'm going to be reliant on you forever, and you've got to pay all my rent, and not only that, you've got to pay all of my disability costs and all of my pharmacy costs and all of it. Oh, and when you get home, you've got to do all the cooking and the cleaning, and you've got to support me. And like, sometimes I'm like, who signs up for that? And the thing is that it's so wrong, because why should I now be completely and fully dependent on someone? I lose my own autonomy and ability to be a person and to be proud and to be a contributing member of my household and relationship. Now, I have a phenomenal partner who will do anything for me, and he's incredible. But my concern is, and my concern has always been, if I was to be in an abusive relationship, how do I get out of it? Because I have no money to my name. Not only that, at what point do you go to your partner and you'll say, can I have $5 for a coffee? Or can I have money for this? Or I want to do something in my community. And at what point do they like, cool, well, what else do you want? Because I'm paying everything. And like, it puts you immediately, it binds you to perpetual poverty. And really, I'm my own independent person coming into a relationship. I should be able to keep my autonomy and independence as a person, and my pride to be able to make decisions for myself that work for me. Because the reality is that my costs actually don't change. Really, we still have to pay for rooms. Like, it still costs to be in a relationship. And with my disability, I need additional space. Like, I have to have an extra room for all of my medical equipment. You know what I mean? And having for someone to be able to stay with us. And I think it is a big part of housing. It's a different conversation, but it is a big part of the housing conversation, because it pushes me back and back and back and back and back. Do you know what I mean? Because I would be working a full-time job, earning an income and bringing that into the house if I was capable and had a position of being able to do that. And that reduces my ability to make housing decisions as easily for myself also on the private market, you know. And I just think we need more accessible housing across the board, and we need to be doing things to make it more sustainable and make it the drive to actually, it works better to make accessible housing. It just makes sense.
Thank you. That was really great. I see Smith just put their hand up. Oh, you're on mute there.
Okay. They're excellent stories that we've heard. I just wonder how many more panel members are speaking, and whether people like myself can say something.
So that was our panel members, and I think we're pretty flexible in terms of our approach. So if you'd like to say something.
Well, I was involved just before Housing New Zealand went into Aotearoa, and there was a seminar in Auckland that most of us in Wellington couldn't get to. So I just boldly asked would they come down, and we ended up having a seminar at the James Cook. Housing New Zealand paid, and that was, of course, Hana Hiki was on the committee at the time of Aotearoa, not now, that I believe, and she managed to get that 15% percentage that was supposed to be made accessible. At the time, they were very honest that they didn't have any data. They didn't know how many disabled people they had. They didn't know how many houses are accessible. And I would love to know right now all of those facts and hold them to account. Karen Davidson chaired that meeting we had at the James Cook. I got about 17 people there, a pretty broad range of people. And it was just as it was going over to Aotearoa. Now, actually, out at a person here, Bob, you're out at Aotearoa. They had done consultation and said they were going to be, you know, major redevelopment and what were the needs and all the rest. And then Aotearoa came along and they seemed to forget the consultation. They forgot the promises. And as far as I can aware, there's not much been happening in the new houses. Or they said, oh, well, some of these are in the pipeline much earlier and, you know, there will be access coming. But I don't see great developments in Aotearoa. I know there's a house accessible in the hut or whatever. There might be a few more now. But I think we need to hold Aotearoa to account. They did agree to the policy. What are they doing about it? And when are they doing something about it? And why aren't they listening to the people in areas such as Aotearoa? One of the people who was at the meeting that we had at James Cook was Pusa Whanau and Lorna from Oasis Centre. And, you know, it's just a sense of frustration that goes 2 steps forward and 1 step back and not much is achieved. My heart goes out to you, to all you younger people like Kylie and the issues. We have been putting forward these issues. Actually, the Aotearoa document that was approved before, the Housing New Zealand did that. They recognised there were issues with the criteria and that for the Ministry of Health. Well, that's now gone to the Ministry for Disabled People. We need to be getting to Waikaha and Ministry for Disabled People, who are now responsible for accessibility and the criteria When are they going to change it, make it more in line with enabling good lives? There's so much that needs to happen in this whole area, but you're probably going to have to pick the things that you can get most out of, about a bucks for your, what is it?
Bang for your buck.
Bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Yes, because there's so much that the individual needs that I hear make me cry. I'm now actually in a rest home. That was of my choice, because while I'd made my house accessible, I was looking to need somebody always there, and the support arrangements would have been, not very good. So I'm in here, and I sold my house, and it was accessible, and I ideally would have liked it to go to a disabled person. Unfortunately, it was at the peak of the housing market. I didn't do this intentionally, but it had to go to somebody who didn't have a disability. My heart broke over this. So look, there's so many things in housing. It's the key to a good life. Enabling good lives, that's having secure, affordable housing, and also recognising that our needs can change over time. So I'll shut up at that point, but there needs to be, I think you've got to, if you want to do something, Jan, you've got to really sort of punch it to the 2 or 3 key places. The Ministry for Disabled People, what are they doing about the criteria such as the one you mentioned, Kylie, that, oh, you can have this, but then if you use this for a modification, you can't have it next time. Your needs don't stay the same. There's so much kainga ora you've got to punch at. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you very much. That was a great contribution. I see Martine's hand up.
Yes, just in case people couldn't join us from the beginning, I'm totally blind and I've got weak ankles, and I live with my retired and current guide dog. And I say this because when I say that I'm full-time employed with the Human Rights Commission, and I'm president of the World Blind Union and an Auckland Council's Disability Advisory Panel, I want to assure people that I'm doing this as a disabled people, but I also realize that I'm quite privileged in having bought my property 20 years ago in Auckland, and I've since spent thousands on it to make it accessible. And I'm really keen, and I put this out there for anybody, because I know sometimes, people say modifications can be stepless or this or that, but we've got a pool, I've got everything outdoor with carpeting, and I would love to show people what we've done. I don't think it's perfect for everybody, but I sometimes think if you don't share what you have done with other people, then people won't know what's possible. So I want to put out there that that people contact me because they want to share my privilege. And then I also want to remind people that this is the time of local elections. Yes, local councils do not have mandate over regulation and legislation, but they can big time advocate to central government. And that's why we've got Jan and Anna here, because local central government will listen to local government, because local government will need to implement what central government is saying. So I really want to say to people, we need to all stay in touch with one another and share the solutions. Sometimes it's not all that expensive, and sometimes the agencies that will help us suggest items of solutions might not know the best. It's fellow disabled people that say, oh, have you tried this or that? So just very briefly from me, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Martine. And that's a perfect segue into the final kind of thoughts around what do we need to do and what could we do at this time to improve the situation. And I just want to take the opportunity to mention the fact around local government and their ability to be advocating. So to central government, but also that Thames Hauraki, their council, has incentivised the building of homes to universal design standards by giving developers who build to universal design standards more use of space on the land. And Hamilton, Kirikiriroa, which I'm sure Kylie knows, has recently made a commitment to, in the central city, reducing development fees if developers build to universal design. And I know that in Dunedin, they've made changes around access to their social housing. They've made a commitment to continuing to provide social housing and to improve access for disabled people. So there are just 3 examples of specific things that councils could do that we could be asking them about now that the people are asking for our votes, as well as whether they will be advocating to central government to get better standards across the board. So, but now, but they were just one solution that I thought of. So I'll go back to Bob in terms of your ideas of things that we could do now. And you're on mute.
Okay, take me by surprise. I don't know, but actually, there's another little issue I just thought of when you were just talking now, and something we're seeing quite regularly. And while it's not directly disabled housing related, one thing we're finding out of Aotearoa here is with the high density housing and the lack of off-street car parking. And what's happening is a lot of people are starting to park on footpaths and stuff. Which is blocking bloody wheelchair access and prams and stuff. It's actually, I'm aware probably over the last 18 months, I'm thinking 18 months, there's been 2 incidences of people actually falling off wheelchairs and mobility scooters because they've been trying to get their bloody cars parked on the footpath. So that's another issue that sort of revolves around the housing issues as well. Which probably needs, I think sometimes, quite honestly, I'm a critical thinker, and I quite honestly, I think of some of the government policies and go, they're absolutely absurd. I do probably agree that we need to, and made a good point before about not being able to visit other people because their houses are not accessible, and I think that's a good point. And I mean, it's probably something we should be striving for 100%. Accessible housing, whether the owners, tenants need them or not, because it isn't, it's that whole social interaction comes into play, isn't it? It's you know, it's like the things we do at our own homes, like the gardening and stuff. You know, having a yard there, we can actually do that with, you know, and having yards for our dogs or you know, our pets, whatever, you know, so all that sort of stuff as well. So yeah, you do. I sort of sitting and thinking, yeah, a lot of short-sightedness going on. You know, it needs to be. That's what I was saying before the meeting about this whole cross-portfolio situation. You know, there seems to be a bit of a problem between all the different portfolios, and that there just seems to be no connect there at all sometimes. So yeah, interesting.
It was me on mute. Just say goodbye. Thanks, Bob. I'm sorry about that. I'll just now go to Susan.
Am I off mute?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, I think there's been some excellent points made by people, and I think what needs to happen now is flexibility. Not only do these houses need to be created, they need to be created to universal design standards, but they also need to think about where is best to live. Like you're saying, central can be good, close to transport, close to people. And we need to have a right to move, and we need to have a right to be able to say what accessible is for us. So the funds that have been mentioned to renovate a house don't apply to me. Because there is no tick box for blackout curtains. And there is no tick box for I have ridiculous executive dysfunction and I'm incapable of doing dishes. So what I need to make my house accessible is it being close to things and a dishwasher. So there are things that people don't think about for accessibility. So there has to be flexibility, and there has to be this right to renovate and to have essentially the funds and the support to move. So we have a right to move, and we have a right to determine our own lives, and we have options of where to move to, because at the moment we're going, cool, I will actually be able to stay alive there and I won't be homeless, and that is kind of the priority. And I won't be in this current place that's even worse. And we need to have the ability to choose and to self-determination and to say what is accessible for us. Accessible houses being available is essential, but it has to stay flexible, and there needs to be that there so that everyone can equitably create the home that is right for them, whether it has multiple rooms, whether it's that it needs to be freestanding, whether there's a certain appliance choice or anything that needs to be made, whether it's that you've got to be able to have pets, and that is a big one for me. So it's a case of creating a world where there is choice and basically legislation. And the other thing is we just need to throw money at this problem, and we need to make governments throw money at this problem, because a lot of our inaccessibility would be solved with the kind of money that is for governments, petty cash. Kia ora. And we also need flexible living as well. I was going to say I'm queer, so like my life relationships don't look like everyone else's, so it's that ability to choose.
Thank you.
Kylie. I think again, following on from what Susan said, there needs to be legislation, or there needs to be conversation around how we keep it's all good to have accessible housing, but how do we keep accessible housing for those with access needs? And we make sure that things like Smith, that their house goes to someone that needs it, and that's someone that benefits it, but also that doesn't disadvantage Smith from the sale of their property either. Sorry, I didn't remember your last first name. I can just see your name on there. We need to make sure that people selling their homes aren't disadvantaged to sell it to someone with an access need, and that someone with an access need can access the additional supports or funds to get into housing, because we are known for staying in it. Once we find somewhere, we're often known for staying in our housing a lot longer, because there often aren't the choices and you find something that works, but like my friend that was building the houses and had a whole company around building accessible homes specifically made for people with access needs, but after 7 homes, none of them went to anyone with any access needs. He got completely disillusioned by the whole process, and it's just like, this is a waste of time, because lots of disabled people came through, lots of disabled people bid for it, but they couldn't bid high enough. They were outbid by able-bodied people, and it's not saying able-bodied people don't deserve to be in accessible homes. That's not the point I'm saying either, because I think everyone deserves to be in an accessible home. And the other thing I think that I need to clarify is that someone with I'm not classifying able-bodied as someone that appears to be able to walk, talk, or move properly or do anything, because actually access needs come from a whole range of issues, and we also know that access needs can appear invisible, and that you can't always see access needs or impairments at a face value. So I wanted to throw that in there and just say, like, I'm acknowledging all of it, but I think, how do we make sure that the people that are needing the homes are getting into the homes once the homes are available? And I think that's the big question. And then, like they said, making sure that accessible housing developments are being built where there is access to decent public transport, where there are access to amenities, you know, where there's a local supermarket 2 minutes down the road, because, you know, like a lot of us don't necessarily have access to easy transport either. Now there's things like, you know, countdown deliveries now, but it's just giving people options, so choices and community and spaces like anyone else that doesn't have to think about every moment and plan out every section of their day. And, you know, how do I even get from the pathway to the curb, you know, because I can't go up it, or I trip down it, or where am I parking because of my door only opens one way and I have to be at a certain style of park. Like, we have to think about so many things throughout our days that is normal for us. So I know, how do we even that playing field so that there's the ability to get into the houses and to buy into housing, you know?
Thank you. And you point to, you know, the how much work there is to do, but also the connection between housing and income and transport and urban design, and you know, the policies of it in our health services, and you know, like, we need to be thinking about this holistically, and I think you've all pointed that out really powerfully. Before I finish with a karakia to close, I do feel like I just need to mention that the Accessibility for New Zealanders bill is, which is an opportunity to be talking about how we start to really speed up this process of change, because as I think Martine pointed out really well at the beginning of the meeting, and Smith as well, that actually this is not a new conversation. Disabled people have been talking about the need for fundamental change for a really long time, and we haven't seen the progress that we need to. So there's been a lot of work done to be thinking about legislation that looks like overseas models of kind of around accessibility as a right. And that's around housing, that's around education, that's around transport, that's around information and everything, right? And that we have a bill in front of Parliament that sets up, in effect, a consultation process and doesn't bring standards or enforceability. So just encourage people to think about this conversation and what you think would help make the change that we need, and that piece of legislation being an opportunity for that. Submissions close.
Oh, Jan, can I say, I've had my hand up for a bit, but it's obviously
not sorry, I couldn't see.
No worries. Listen, I went to a affordable housing conference in Auckland about a week or two ago, and just there is some quite good news coming up around all of this at the moment. So a chap called, there's a number of speakers. First of all, before I go any further, Smith's real name is Valerie.
I know. I've just unmuted me to put that over.
Sorry, I did love the name.
Oh,
Smith.
sorry.
I'm going to call you Smith from now
Thanks,
on,
Valerie.
Valerie. It's
God.
fine. Good.
Right.
So look, one of the speakers, a guy called Sam Stubbs, who some of you know through Simplicity, he's building a whole bunch of build to rent apartments, 1 to 3 bedroom ones. The 64 at a time, he's building them for a very good price, and they are all going to be accessible. So the first few were only accessible on the lower levels, the next lot are all going to be accessible all the way through. And his argument has been that it costs almost no different at the front end to build in the accessibility standards for level 5 of the code, and put in decent sized lifts so people aren't squeezing into little things. It costs almost nothing. So he's doing that. Then there are other speakers who are thinking about, it's to do with the reducing carbon really, but looking at trying to develop neighbourhoods so that people can get around, be it in a wheelchair or pushing a pram or whatever, to shops, everything that we're talking about. So actually there's quite a big groundswell for this happening. It's been driven, interestingly, by the need to reduce carbon as much as anything else. So
Yay,
we'll take
climate
that
action.
I know, we'll take that as a win. But sorry, the other comment I just want to make just briefly is thank you everybody for thinking about accessibility in this very broad way that you've been discussing it, because I think very often accessibility is narrowed down to, you know, wheelchair users, to be a bit coarse about it. Whereas in fact, it's way more complex than that, and the level of needs are much greater. So thank you. It's been a very interesting conversation. I'll shut up now, Jen.
Oh no, thank you so much. And it's nice to finish on a positive note, actually, before we go to karakia. Was that a quick thing, Kylie?
No, I was just going to say, really trumpeting those, empowering those real stories, I think is also going to go a long way to show, actually, if it makes fiscal and economical sense, then why wouldn't you, you know? And so showing that is phenomenal, you know? Yeah.
Well, there, and Martine's just had to go because we are over time. That I really want to thank you for your contributions. And I will now finish our panel with a karakia, which ka whakairea te tapu kia wātia ai te ara, kia tūruki whakataha ai, kia tūruki whakataha ai, hui tai kie. Pomare. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.